Hello coders, welcome to Thursday morning. It is Thursday, just checking the date, 22nd of August. Gosh, this year's going fast. My name's Peter Fisher. I am the host of the How to Code Well YouTube channel, Twitch channel, and all that other good stuff. And today we're going to be continuing on the journey of creating this PHP object-orientated project that I'm going to be using to teach OOP for FreeCodeCamp. We are building the Invoice application. This is the application that we're going to be creating. And we're not using any frameworks. We're not using any libraries. We're not using any shiny stuff like that. We're just creating it off of our own backs. One thing we are using, however, is Codeception to do all of our tests. Now, yesterday I did a lot of stuff to do with the find and the find all, find one, find all. I think it was the actual invoice itself. One thing we have neglected to do is deal with the invoice item, and I just want to just take a moment to talk about that. So the way the invoice will be structured, the architecture, if you will. So you have an invoice. The invoice has many invoice items. The invoice has a status and it has a customer. All of these things are different entities. We've dealt with the customer, the status, and the invoice, but we haven't really dealt with the invoice item. Now, I did try and tackle this in a different approach before, where I was talking about the hydrators and how on earth are we going to hydrate the invoice item entities based upon an invoice, because obviously you would have the invoice ID attached to that invoice item record. We got ourselves in a little bit of tricky water there, and then I decided to take another tack and work on the actual finding of those before we hydrate them. So we've now got ourselves to a comfortable position where we need to deal with the invoice items and the find by stuff. I'm just going to go to the code. I'll show you what I mean before, just to stop myself from rambling too much. We have the invoice repository, we have the customer repository and the status repository. We don't have the invoice item. Same with the managers. We do have the invoice item hydrator, but there's nothing to hydrate because we don't have those find by mechanisms. And the entities are set up like this. So you've got the customer, the invoice item, and the status. The actual SQL here is that an invoice will have many items. So we have item array here. And then when we hydrate the invoice, we need to hydrate the items that the invoice is associated to, or I should say, hydrate the invoice items that the invoice is associated to the invoice, that kind of way, because it goes back the way. So this is where we are with the project, and this is what I want to be dealing with today. And I think that this will round off the whole find by mechanisms and the hydrators quite well. And then what I would like to do after this, perhaps not today, I don't think we've got enough time for that, is to build an actual test that tests the creation of an invoice, a customer, a status, all of the invoice items, everything to do with the invoice in one test, as a big integration test. That will give me the green light and the thumbs up to then consider building the front end for this stuff, where we need to deal with forms and controllers and views and all of that other jazz. The routing, all of that has been created. That's already been done in the previous streams. So I think this is kind of like the last part of the MySQL portion of this project. So what we're going to do is, as the stream was coming on, I was just creating some issues here that we're going to deal with today. We've created the find all for invoice item. I need to do a find one. So create find one for invoice item. And if we can get these two bits done today, then that would be super labels. That's what I'm looking for. I want to model and MySQL. Awesome. Okay, so what's happened? Nope. There we go. Oop. That didn't save. Why did that not save? Find all. That's weird. Brilliant. Let's do that again. Find one for invoice item. Yes, I would like to assign it to myself, and I would like to have the labels of model and MySQL, MySQL, and then submit. Thank you. Okay. So let's work on the first one, the find all, because that's probably the slightly easiest one out of the two. This is issue 80, so we go to the code here, and this we're going to create like almost like a TDD type styley here. We don't have, like I said, we don't have the repository and we don't have the manager, so we're going to have to build those. But the test itself should follow. Excuse me. Gosh. Excuse me. Should follow the suit of the previous tests. So here we have the integration. So let's just copy the status one for now. So this is DB invoice item entity test. Let's change that. Oh, excuse me. Okay. Yeah, so let's clear down that import. We don't need that. Thank you. So we need to change DB status. We're going to do Control and then R. So we copy that in DB status. We want to change that to be DB invoice item. Invoice item. Okay. So what have we got here? We got the get manager, test find status that doesn't exist, fine. Find all statuses, fine. Okay, so yeah, we've got things to play with here. So we're going to create, what we need to do is we need to obviously create an invoice item. No, yep, thank you. And we're going to set the reference. So we're going to do, let's just do development time. What else have we got? Total, we're just going to have, say, 150. We're going to do VAT. I think there's VAT on this, or maybe not. Unit price. Oh, okay. So set units, we're going to have, let's say, 7 units. Set unit price, that needs to be, I don't know, let's just set it as that. It's not going to do a calculation or anything, I don't think. Set the description. Whoopsie, there we go. Apologies. Okay. So invoice item, we've created that. Now what we would like to do, method call uses 1 parameter but 0 parameters. What? Oh, that's sorry, I want set description. Beg your pardon. That's set reference. There we go. I'm just going to set that to be dev time rather than. So now we need to save that. The manager that we need to get is the invoice item manager, which doesn't exist, and we need to have the invoice item repository, which again doesn't exist, and we return the invoice item manager, which doesn't exist. So this isn't going to work at all, is it? But we are building the foundations for all of this. So that's the invoice item manager. This is the invoice item repository. like so. There we go. So we're building that out. And then after that, after we've saved it, we then try and attempt to find it based on the saved item that we have, because we should be returning the invoice item, the entity that we've saved, and therefore we have the ID that was last put into the database, which means therefore we can now do we can now check the found bits and pieces. I think yesterday I mentioned that we could just compare the objects, but we'll just keep with this for now. So that's going to be get reference. Then we're going to have get total and all of this other jazz. Get reference is get reference on here. We're also going to have get total. What else? We've got units, we've got unit price, and we've got description. So we have get units, get unit price, price, and we have get description. Okay, so as you can see, all of this is all in PHP Storm's eyes. It's all sort of like grayed out, or yeah, I guess you would call it like that, a highlight thing. This means that none of this actually works. This means that these things don't exist. Method cannot be found and all that other jazz. Which means that when I run this, it's going to fail. So what we're going to do is copy that. We need to actually start the containers. Whoops. So I need to do a reverse search, I think. And it is eval. There we go. And then we're going to we're going to dive into. Sorry, I was playing with a lot of MySQL backups yesterday. So in using Docker. So I just want to make sure that none of that is on my history. I'm using a different bash shell, so hopefully not. Right, we need to dive into the container, don't we? So we need to dive into the web container as bash. There we go, cool. And then we should be able to run an integration test. Yep, this is what we were doing yesterday. And we're going to paste that in, and we're going to run this. And it fails. And it fails because the invoice item repository doesn't exist. So this is how I like to develop. We work through a way of, we create a test, we know it's going to fail, but we then use the test to work out which parts we need to build for it to pass. This whole sort of test-driven development type thing. There's a lot of people who says that TDD is a waste of time and all this jazz, but I actually think it's quite good. It makes developing a little easier, I think, because you know what you want to achieve, you know what the end result is, and if you've got a pattern like this, where a lot of things are doing the same thing. So we've got the managers for the repository, for the invoices, the customers and statuses. They all follow a similar pattern, but it's very easy for a pattern to come out of sync. So doing the TDD type like this means that you are constantly checking that pattern every time, as you develop it. So yeah. Whatever, side rant. So anyway, invoice item repository. So I need to build that out. So that is, where are we? Here, invoice repository. We're going to copy this. I'm going to copy the status one, I think. So this is invoice item, and it doesn't have a capital N for invoice. Change that. Okay, so we pass in the connection as a constructor, which is fine. We do all that. That's fine. Let's open that up. We need to have an invoice item hydrator. Hydrator here. I wish there was a way that PHP Storm could identify what was on the right of the cursor when you do things like this. And if it has the same word, then it doesn't put it in. That would be super handy. So invoice item. That is, of course, the entity that we need. Okay. So that is now. We're just basically going to fill out the blanks, really. So that's fine. This is now invoice, and I believe it's invoice underscore item. We'll check that in just a second. This is now the invoice item hydrator. And let's see. So this is invoice item table. Really, this needs to be in a constant, to be honest. And I think I might do that once we're happy with everything is working as it should do. I was talking on the Sunday stream last Sunday. Someone brought up the point that I was duplicating a lot of code, which I am doing here. The Sunday stream I was dealing with some other project. And my thoughts on this is right now I'm building a feature. And yes, that feature is a duplicate feature, essentially, of other things, but one shouldn't ever attempt to refactor code whilst they're building features or removing features or editing features, because refactoring should be done as an individual project, sub-project, if you will. You would like to have everything in a single commit in a refactor. You wouldn't want to muddy up the waters of your commits to be both building a feature and refactoring code. So I like to write my code, identify the areas that need to be tidied up, and then refactor it after I've actually written the code. Because also you have the ability there of writing a test whilst you're building duplicate code, which means that once you've refactored that code, you then have the luxury of running the tests that you had built beforehand, and they should pass. If they haven't passed, then you've broken something in refactoring. But it's very difficult if you muddle all those two things together. So refactoring and building out features. So right now what I'm doing is building out these features here, and then afterwards what I'll do is I'll address these common issues. So on the save routine, we're passing in the invoice item. There we go. We're returning the invoice item. And there's a whole bunch of other things that we need to do here, obviously. So we have get reference, we have get total. So this is reference here. Now these need to be the same as reference, and this is total. These need to be the same as the schema in the fields, if you will. Reference. We have other things in here. We have, I think it's get units. Is it get units? Yeah, get units and get unit price. So get unit price. So I think it's unit with an underscore, unit price. And I believe this is just get units like so. But we'll check all of this. We'll was there anything else I needed to add? Get description, yes. Okay, so the table name, again, this needs to be, it should be a constant. But invoice item, just to make this feature work. And also it means that you can ship this, right? So it is acceptable to some degree to ship code that needs to be refactored, because refactoring shouldn't have any impact on the features. Do you see what I mean? Because you break up the necessity and the need and the desire of you shouldn't just be worried about shipping beautiful code. If the code does exactly what the requirements say it should do, and it doesn't break, you've got tests behind it. It doesn't really matter how messy the code is on the first iteration. If you're able to have time to refactor the code after you've pushed it to production, then perfectly fine. Yeah, I know that I'm. This is very sort of a lovely paint world I paint here, where people have lots of time to do lots of things after they push to production. But the danger is, of course, that if you start refactoring and abstracting, you're going to make it more difficult if you start over abstracting, and also you'll end up just never pushing it to production, because you're chasing that impossible code beautiful target, which doesn't, if you're not pushing your code because you've missed out a PHP doc block, then you've got problems, right? Anyway, so this seems to be all put through. We have that test to check that this doesn't work, which is good. So now we're going to run this again, and it's still going to fail because we don't have the manager. So that's the next thing we need to build out. So we're going to copy the status manager, add this to be the invoice item. So invoice item, like so. Whoopsie. And there's a couple of things that we need to play around with here. Again, we're going to go back to the imports. This needs to be invoice item. This needs to be invoice item repository. That we've just created, so it should be there. Excellent. So let's copy that, put that in there. That is what we're going to inject into this constructor. That's the word I was looking for. This also needs to be the invoice item. It either finds it or it doesn't, and it returns a null if it doesn't. Same with the save. We pass in the actual entity that we wish to save, which is invoice item. And then there we go. That looks good to me. Okay, so let's run this test and see what happens. So it still fails, and this is call to member, get reference on null. Okay, so this is interesting. So where did that go? Does this give me a line number? Yes, it does. So invoice item entity test. So let's go back to the test now. On line 36, which is this one here. So what's happening? We have call to member get reference. So get reference on null. Save entity appears to be null. Why? Why does it appear to be null? Is it because if I scroll up to the top, and this is the problem, we haven't done any vigorous testing on actually checking the error response of the SQL. So this is obviously errored somewhere and we haven't caught it. Let's take a look at the MySQL data schema invoice item. We have an invoice ID which isn't null, which to me suggests that we need to create an invoice ID, an invoice for this to be attached to, and that does make sound sense, really, if you think about it. There's no point in having an invoice item without an invoice, right? So, okay, let's just double check our workings first. Let's just copy all of that. Whoops. And put it into the manager. No, sorry, the repository on when we attempt to save it. So this is all the data that we are attempting to save. So we don't need to worry about the ID because that's already dealt with. We don't need to worry about these dates because they're also dealt with. We have the reference, that's fine. We have the description, that is fine. We have the unit price, that is fine. We have the units, that's fine. Do we have the total? We do, that is fine. We don't therefore have that invoice ID, so that is the problem here. Okay, so before we save the invoice item, we must have an invoice, which makes sense really if you think about it. So what we need to do is we need to create an invoice first. So we're going to do invoice, and this is where we start getting, this is where we were getting problems with beforehand, when I was trying to build a hydrator, and it got me into this chicken and egg scenario where we didn't actually have the invoice, but we wanted to try and hydrate the invoice item. But now we have the save routine of the invoice, we can actually start doing this. So I'm going to create an invoice. So we're going to do new invoice. Let's just optimize those imports. And we're going to do invoice set. We don't need to worry about this too much. I'm going to have set reference. We're just going to do test invoice. I think that's the bare minimum I could do. There is also invoice. Okay. Yeah, I see. So we need to save this. What we need to do, and this is going to be a little bit tricky, what we need to do is we need to save the invoice. We then need to save the invoice item and pass in the invoice ID. That is essentially what we need to achieve here. Whoops, I've spelled that wrong. So we need to have get invoice manager, which is slightly different from the from this manager, because we're using the invoice rather than the invoice item. Whoops. Invoice repository, and this is invoice manager, and that returns an invoice manager. And let's optimize those imports. Thank you. Okay. So we get the invoice manager, and then we can save that. I'm just going to explicitly say that this is the invoice manager. And likewise, I'm going to say that this is the invoice item manager. So we need to save that. What I'm going to do, first of all, before I even deal with any of this stuff, we are going to write a very simple test. I shouldn't say simple because it never is, but we're going to not worry too much about the invoice item for now. Let's just focus on the invoice. We're going to do found invoice is equal to the invoice item manager, find one by that saved entity. Saved entity returns is this, so that needs to be saved invoice. Like so, pass that in here. That gets the ID. And then we're going to grab this. So this asserts the same, that found invoice get reference is the same as the saved invoice. Whoops, sorry. Whoa. I need to see it. Saved invoice, and then that is the get reference. So let's just comment out all of this. First of all, make sure that we have the invoice. That's the first thing, right? So we're going to run this, and that's passed. So we've created and saved an invoice, and we found and returned that invoice, and we're checking that the reference is the same. Okie dokie. Now we focus on the building of the invoice item. So How do we do that? Because if I did set, there is no set invoice here. So we need to plug away with that and put that in. If I was to run this, it will fail because this doesn't have the invoice that's been set. So if I ran this, I'm thinking, my theory is that this is the case. So sorry, it's on the find one, isn't it? Is that it? Is that the thing? Interesting. Let's go through all of this. That is confusing. Why is this now passing? Maybe. There we go. Okay, get reference on null. Saying here that the saved entity is null. That's confusing. That really is confusing. If I was to, let's say, let's comment that out. Yeah, total. So yeah, it is a problem with the fact that it's come back as null, and I believe it's because we haven't been able to save it. And I think if I was to comment that out, and if I went to this assert instance of, and this was the invoice, whoopsie, come on, invoice item class based on the saved entity, it will return null. That will fail. I think that is the case. Wow, that's really confusing. That's now saying that it is. Huh. What? Hang on a minute. Something isn't right here. Something isn't right. Let's check that again for the found entity. Yeah, so, okay, the found. So we can save it, which is weird, but we can't find it. Let's have a look. Find one. Invoice item, find one. Invoice item, where the ID, and then item hydrate. Could it be a problem with this item hydrator? Reference description, total, unit price, units. And then we hydrate the rest of them. Okay. Okay. I'm a little bit confused. Invoice item manager, find one, saved entity, get ID. So, do we have the ID? So what we could do is var, no, sorry, it's the CodeCamp debug, that's what I want here. And we're going to pass in saved entity. And I'm going to do -- debug. Hopefully that will return as it is here. So we have the invoice item, we have dev time, development time, we have the item, what is that? The unit price, the units, the total. We don't have an ID. ID is 0. Why is ID 0? Of the saved thing. So that to me suggests that when we're saving it, which is Save this routine here. We're not updating the ID. We're not dealing with that last ID. Here we go. Is there a problem here? Is there a problem here? It suggests that that isn't working, which is a bit peculiar because it's obviously working in the other ones. Why is that 0? Is that 0 by default? That doesn't seem right, does it? Invoice item. We haven't overwritten that. Abstract entity ID. This ID, set ID, blah, 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 blah. So I would expect that to be okay. All right, I'm getting a little bit confused here. Let's take a look at the raw database. That would help. Docker exec -it. We're passing in this here, and it is -u root -p. That doesn't fill me full of confidence. Oh, sorry. Yep, MySQL. Show, I can't remember what the database is called. Show databases. Been working with so many recently. Use tests invoice. Whoopsie. App. Select all from invoice item. It's empty, so it's not even being persisted. Okay, so at least we know that it's not actually being persisted. Let's go back into the web container here. Run that again. This is where we're at. So we're creating this invoice item. Somehow that's been set to 0. I'm guessing it's set to 0 if there's a failure. And I'm guessing the failure is because there isn't actually an invoice item ID. So, and that's kind of my hunch. My hunch is that because the invoice item has the requirement of the invoice ID that isn't null, which means that it needs to be there. So we need to somehow set that, and we don't have say set invoice. We don't have that. That is what I would like to do. If we ran this, we're going to get a failure here because that doesn't exist. Set invoice doesn't exist. So let's go and build that out. So I'm just going to grab that. This needs to be private variable invoice. Now we have to be careful here because we don't want to be hydrating the invoice for every invoice item, because then that would be silly. We get a circular reference here. If you were to imagine the invoice and the invoice items in a sort of a object-orientated kind of manner, you would have an invoice, then you would have an invoice item, and then you would have an invoice that attaches to that invoice item. Then you would have all of those invoice items, and for each one of those invoice items, we would have an invoice, and it would just get to a complete mess. This is where we need to be careful when we're hydrating these objects. And if anybody is looking at using this project as a way of doing like I've said this a million times. This is not a production ready project, and it certainly shouldn't ever be considered as an alternative to Doctrine. No. Doctrine does all of this so much better. Okay, so we're just going to get to the bottom here, and I'm just going to do the magic in PHP Storm. That brings up the... no, not a new scratch file. Come on. There we go. Implement getters and setters, invoice, fluent setters, thank you very much. And that's gone through. Okay, which means now we need to change the invoice. Let's see, the invoice manager. When we save that goes to the repository. So this needs to be invoice underscore item. Oh, sorry, invoice. Sorry, ID is equal to entity get invoice get ID, like so. Okay, right, let's see now if that has done anything. And it's passed. My hunch was correct. Sorry, I'm looking down there because my phone is flashing. I just want to make sure. Nope, nobody's calling. Thank God. It's 8:13. I hope there's no clients calling me now. 8:13 in the morning. Most people are in bed still. Right. Okay. So that's done. I'm a little bit concerned though because we haven't got any tests to check the failures of MySQL. Or the PDO, you know, it was obviously returning a 0 for the ID when it shouldn't have done, when it failed. But here we can see we've now created this invoice item where we have passed in the invoice itself, the invoice object. So that's and this is the thing. This is the problem, right? Can you see where I'm coming from in terms of this issue with the circular references? This is the output of the invoice item object, sure? Yeah? Okay. The invoice item is attached to an invoice because it's attached to the invoice ID. Scroll down here, we have items, right? So that there's more so this could be back to itself, which therefore would mean that we would have lots of nested stuff and it would become a recursive circular nightmare. Where you have an invoice, where you have an invoice item that has an invoice attached to an invoice object, which has items, which are therefore an array of each one of these things. And each one of these things would have associated back to the invoice, and the invoice would have a bunch of items. This is the challenge. This is the challenge we have to face soon, where we are staring into this abyss at the moment where we can't... The hydrators that we've created right now, they hydrate a single entity. So if we look at this, for instance, if we look at the status hydrator, it is just hydrating the status. If we look at the customer hydrator, it is hydrating a single customer. If we look at the invoice hydrator, it is hydrating a single invoice. If we look at the invoice item, it is just doing a single invoice item. But, what if we want the invoice to also hydrate all the items within it? So I get the invoice item, I get an array of all items within the invoice. We meet, the danger is that we go, I also want the invoice item to also hydrate the invoice that it's associated to. If we did both of those things, we would turn into have this great nightmare of a circular, recursive doom, where where they're both, I guess in Doctrine's words, it would be bidirectional, where one is referencing and associated to the other, and that is also associated back. We can't do that. That is a no-no. So we need to be super careful. And this is all handled in Doctrine very, very nicely in the annotations and the mapping and all of that other jazz. It's a massive black box where I'm not overly aware with what it's doing, but I just accept that it works because it's been working for years and years. It's probably a little bit naive of me to say that, but that is one of the major challenges with mapping out relational data, is when one piece of data, the leaf, is also associated back to the trunk, to the tree, and the tree is associated to the leaf. And it's like, well, you know. Anyway, so this is now working. Woohoo! I'm just trying to pronounce that in my head. Thank you very much, Mesh Huggasain. Thank you. Thank you very much for following. I appreciate it. Thank you very much. Please let me know where you are in the world. Let me know what you're doing, what you're working on, whether you're learning code for the very first time or whether you're a veteran of code. What kind of stuff do you play with? What stuff do you work on? What is the passion that you have, the drive of code? Let me know. Put your thoughts down in the chat window and let's have a discussion. These streams aren't supposed to be a one-way street of just me doing coding, right? I do like to have a bit of banter. There is a lot of banter that happens on the Sunday streams. I do stream on Sundays occasionally for much longer, and we do have a lot of conversations, which is super awesome. So if you're around on Sunday, do follow along. There's going to be one this Sunday too. I think it's going to be at 14:30 British Summer Time. I believe, but I'll let you guys know. I usually tweet and Instagram like a countdown of when these are going to be, and I've been trying to do it better with the events on the Twitch thing here. One thing I will say though is the Sunday streams are not archived to YouTube. They are specifically for Twitch only. These streams are archived because this is building an application. And I do think that this is some good. Well, I would hope that it's good content that people might find it useful. Twitch has this thing, if you don't know, Twitch has this thing where, certainly for my level of the channel, the size of it, they remove videos that have been previously streamed every fortnight, every 2 weeks. So, meh. Anyway, let's get back to the code here. So we have the invoice item hydrator. That seems to be doing its job, which is awesome. We're going to purposely not hydrate the invoice. That's the whole point, what I was trying to say here. We're going to purposely not hydrate that because then we get into dangers and deep waters with that becoming a circular nightmare. So let's take a look at the other tests, because by Jove, we've only done one test today. Ugh, that's not good. And let's just put all these back in just to make sure that is working. Hopefully, fingers crossed now. Fingers crossed this will work. I have an ID here. So let's see. Yes, it does. I can remove that debug. There we go. Awesome. Excellent. Lovely stuff. That's done. Next thing. Scroll down. We have, we don't need to worry about those managers. This one here, we have invoice item, find by one ID that doesn't exist. So this hopefully should be a case of, invoice, changing that, setting the ID, instantiating an invoice item here, putting a massive ID on here of 5001. We don't have an item of 5001. We attempt to try and find it, and then we should return null. So let's just run that test. Hopefully that is working as expected. One thing I will say though is that I was doing this again. It was doing this yesterday. It's not allowing me to copy and paste. No. Come on, Control C. Command C, Command V. Come on. One thing I will say, yeah, that works. Awesome. Is that I couldn't actually get the chat thing to work this morning, so on Twitch. So if you're trying to ask me questions and I'm not responding, I have the pop-out window here. Don't blame me, because I can't see anything. Okay, so we have that. Okay, so now we're trying to find all statuses. Sure. So we need to do this a similar thing. Up here, we're going to grab all of this. Find all invoice items. So we're going to find all invoice items. We're going to create an invoice, and we're going to create entity 1. Which is here. We're also going to do entity 2. Which is there. We're going to save those two, and then we're going to attempt to find them all, making sure that it is an array that's returned. It is also greater than 1. The count of that is greater than 1, and obviously this needs to be the invoice item. Come here. There we go. Instance. Yeah. Okay. Just checking that. All right. Come on, PHP Storm. Command C. Remove all of that stuff. Paste. No. Try it again. Command C. There we go. And that's passed. Okay, so we've got the find all and we've got the find one working fine with the invoice item, which is great. But we also need to do something slightly differently with the invoice item. We need to do the invoice. So if you imagine we've got we're looking at the invoice on the screen here. Okay, so we've got a list of items. The first thing, so it's like, so let's say, for example, we've gone to, let's just put in some rubbish here. I'll sort this out later. So if we we go to invoice, and we go to invoice with the ID of, say, 100, or that's not 100. This is 100. Okay. So we land on that request. Okay, so we land on that request. We get that invoice. That invoice also has the customer and the status. Fine, but we also have, and we've got all that stuff. That's no problem. But we also have a list of invoice items. We want to get the invoice items by the ID of the invoice that we've passed. So we've got the ID of 100 here. We don't have the mechanism to do that. Excuse me. So we need to add that in. So we need to we're going to do another test, which is very similar to this one. But instead of running find all, we need to do find all invoice items by invoice ID. And let's just change that to be find all. There we go. And this is find all by invoice ID. Okay, so the idea here is we have a test invoice that we have just created. We build all the entities like so, but instead of doing a find all, we want to do find all by invoice ID, and we want to pass in the invoice ID that we've just created here. So on found invoice, we want to do get ID. So that's the ID of the invoice that we have here. So it is very similar to all of this stuff, right? Very, very similar to the previous test, but this is just doing it from a different direction. And yes, I could probably put all of these in a different function and all of that jazz, and I'll probably do that later or something. I don't know. But anyway, find all by invoice ID. The challenge I get when you over abstract a test is that that you start to become, you lose the definition of the test if you start to over abstract it and you start to put things in other methods that do other things. Although saying that, I was doing a test the other day for an API, and I did put a load of stuff because I noticed that I was testing the same thing on every damn test. So testing for making sure that it was JSON, making sure that it was a 200 OK, making sure that there was a version in the API, all of that kind of stuff. So three assertions that were on every test, and I thought, you know what? Let's make an assert common in the helper for the API tester. And I put all that in, and then I just called that one method for all of the tests, and it obviously reduced by about 2 lines for every test, and so that was a big code change. Tea has now gone to it's gone past lukewarm. It's gone now. It's dead to me. Okay, so this is going to fail, obviously, because we don't have that in here. Let's grab this. Run that test. Just keeping an eye on the time here. It's like I have to do this twice in order for this to work. And now it thinks I've copied a capital A. I haven't done a capital A. I don't know whether this is a problem with the... What? I don't know whether this is a problem with the Apple keyboard. Or whether it's a... Seriously, where did that come from? I'm going to have to type this all out by hand, am I? Copy. Paste. Oh, really? Right. All right, enough of this. Enough of this. Find all. By. Invoice. Right, okay, yeah, so we don't have that. We don't have that. So let's grab that. Are you going to allow me to copy that? Thank you. Let's go back to the manager, which is find all. Right, so we need to have public function. Thank you. Passing in the invoice ID, which is just ID, which is an int. That will return an array. And this will also return this repository, find all by invoice ID. Passing in the ID that we've got, like so. So this is a facade for anyone who wants to know why on earth I'm doing this. This is a facade, or one could argue that it's a decorator. Okay, so the facade of the repository find all, because I don't want to expose repository to the controller. I want to expose the managers. The managers are the things that should be exposed. Okay, so we need to grab that. We're going to go into this here. We're going to create public function. Copy that. Again, this is an int. This is an ID. This is returning an array. No, thank you. I don't like those. Thank you. We're going to do something very similar to this. Again, this will be refactored. Invoice item, find all. This is by invoice ID. Let me just have a look. Find all, find all, find all. Find one by. Okay, yep. This is what we kind of need to do. Whoa, whoa, whoa. So we have the statement here. So we're just going to copy that off this one. we can use the find one by. No. It's not find one by, is it? Statements. Do we? Hang on. Sorry. Yeah, we prepare it and then we put that in. Yeah, I just wanted to double check. So this is the invoice ID. We don't need to do that twice. So that's there. I might just do find all by. There we go. Okay, so we go into the query builder here. We have find all, but we also need to do find statement ID, where ID is equal to that. ID, find all. Sorry, I'm just trying to refresh my memory. Update, let's insert. You don't need to worry about insert or update. Okay, so I think I'm going to need to build a query builder for this. So find all by. That's the table. This is going to be the options. Which is an array. And yeah, I'm going to need to test this, I think. So I think I might, because it's getting on a little bit in terms of time, this is where I think I'm going to focus on tomorrow. Because I need to create this find all by, and I obviously can't use like find all by invoice ID here, because this is a query builder that is should be, when it gets to this point, very generic. So I need to create that, and it's going to sort of hook into sort of this part, I guess. Not that this part, sorry, that's ridiculous. This thing here. So where you create the where clause. So I might have to refactor this a little bit. Or not restructure that a little bit just to work it through. But I need to create a test for this to work. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to just remove that, because I don't want to add any more code that doesn't work. And I think in the invoice item, we're just going to leave that as is, and then tomorrow I'll pick it up as this. So yeah, I'm pretty happy with the way this is all panning out. Once we have this query, I think this is the last query that we need to deal with, and then we can start playing around with the front end. I do, however, want to write a test that does the whole thing, so creating a whole invoice, the customers, the statuses, the invoice items, everything in one single test. It's going to be quite big. And then what I would like to do is then test everything that comes back, so assert that everything is what it should be. And then that would give me the green light, the confidence to say, okay, it's now time to focus on the front end. This is very back-end driven. I appreciate we've been doing a lot of work on the database, but I think we are coming to the point where we can draw a line under it. There will probably be times where I dip into this again whilst I'm doing the front end, but I think we're producing some good foundation work. But anyway, my cat is crying at the door, so I think I'm going to have to probably give him some attention. I have fed him this morning, but if you haven't done so already, please do check out the How to Code Well FM site. So howtocodewell.fm site. This is a podcast that I do every Friday. I have lots of awesome guests on, so do check that out. Also, if you're interested in other things, like I teach Docker and Python and other things, do check out the YouTube channel. I also have a couple of video courses from Manning Books. That was what I was trying to say. From Manning Books and Pact Publishing, I do Docker in Motion. That is a 5 and a bit hour course all about Docker. And I have the Python microservices course and the clean coding microservices, clean coding Python for pack publishing too. So if you're learning Python and you want to up your game, then do check out those video courses. Links are in the show notes as always below, and that would be super cool. Love to hear your feedback if you do get those courses. That would be awesome. But anyway, for now I need to sort out my cat. I need to continue on with some other work. But tomorrow we'll be back at 7:30 British summertime here on Twitch. Thank you very much. Happy coding, everyone. Have a good day. Bye bye.